Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Produce Buzzers podcast. We are so happy you have joined us today, and I think you will be too after the show is over, because you will learn a lot about fresh fruits and vegetables, how to select and store them, how to prepare and cook them, and surprising facts about their history and origin. We hope it inspires you to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, not only for your health, but also for your delight and pleasure as you explore their amazing world of taste and delicious flavors. Eating more of them will transform your life in so many positive ways. So settle back, relax, and get ready for another delicious adventure with the Produce Buzzers. Greetings, fruit and veggie fans around the world. Thanks for joining us once again on the Produce Buzzers podcast. I'm Edwin Stepp, your host and executive editor of producebuzz.com. I'm joined once again by Teresa Nolan, the president and founder of Produce Buzz, along with Rick Stepp and Cynthia Benedetto, both contributing editors to Produce Buzz. So, Produce Buzzers podcast fans and listeners, May is Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And today we have a very special guest on the show that is going to tell us about the substantial contribution that Japanese Americans made to American agriculture, especially on the West Coast, from California through to Oregon, Washington, and even into Idaho. Our guest today is Ron Inatomi, a third-generation Japanese American who has been working in the produce industry for over 40 years. He is the creator and editor of a very interesting and informative Facebook page called Japanese Americans in the Produce and Floral Industry. Check it out. Look for it on Facebook. There's some really interesting posts there. The page reveals a lot about the history of Japanese farmers and also a lot about current Japanese Americans working in the business. Ron is a produce manager for Gelson's Markets, a very high quality grocery store in Southern California. Their stores are beautiful, featuring gourmet foods with fantastic kitchens preparing those foods. And of course, their fruits and veggies are always top notch. Gelson's is a favorite of many of the Hollywood stars in LA area. Ron has worked for Gelson's for his entire career in the produce industry and has some very interesting things to tell us today about how Gelson's assisted Japanese Americans in Southern California after World War II. But before that, we want to learn a little bit about Ron. So Ron, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and especially how you came to work in the produce industry.
Gelson's, 1980, that's when I started. Grew up in Gardena, and then I got my bachelor's at Cal State Dominguez, and I was working at my mother's restaurant, just a stepping stone. So I kind of left that, and a friend told me about a job at Gelson's Market in Newport Beach. That's when it started. I had the opportunity to be all trained by all Nisei gentlemen in the produce department, which was a very colorful time for me.
And by Nisei, that's second generation Japanese Americans?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's great. And there were you told me that there were a lot of Japanese Americans working for Gelson's. They began working for Gelson's after the war.
It's true. Yeah. Bernie Gelson's and Eugene. Their first store was 1951. And after the war, it was very difficult for the Niseis to get jobs, men and women. And Bernie and Eugene Gelson's was so kind to give them jobs.
Right. And
so as they expanded, they just continued to hire all these Nisei gentlemen, and they were the ones that made Gelson's famous. They really put them on the map.
Yeah, because their attention to detail and their attention to quality.
Yes,
I'm sure that was a big part of it. Did a lot of the Nisei have a background in agriculture, or was it?
They did. So I say predominantly, I'm thinking 78% or more all came from farms, working on the farms with their parents
Hmm.
So, yeah, they were used to hard work and, like you said, dedication to detail and the art.
Right.
So it's really, I was lucky to learn from these guys.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there are still a lot of Japanese Americans working for Gelson's now, or has it
You know,
changed some?
it changed some. So when the second generation of Niseis retired, there was quite a few Sansei third generations that were left,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly not the percent that it was back, say, in the 1980s
Right.
and past. Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe you came from an agriculture background, or maybe at least some of your ancestors were farming in Southern California. Is that true?
Well, what's funny is, like most Sanseis, their parents and grandparents really didn't talk about their history too much. They wanted to shelter us, especially during the time World War II.
Right.
So I didn't find out uh, until 2 years ago that my father's family actually farmed in Dominguez Hills.
Oh, which
And
is that in Orange County, or is that still LA County? I can't remember.
LA County.
It's LA County, right?
Right.
Yeah, but very close to Orange County. You're getting almost to Orange County there, I think.
Right.
South
And
of Los Angeles.
that's where I graduated college.
Oh, okay.
And right. And this is back
There's
in
a Cal
78.
State campus there, isn't there? Cal State?
Correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. But so you didn't grow up in agriculture. Your parents weren't farmers.
They weren't. Yeah.
But your
So
grandfather, was it grandfather or?
I take that back. I'm sorry. So it was my grandfather that leased the farms in Dominguez. And of course, my dad and his brothers and sisters all helped out on the farm. So they were on the farm. Yes.
But by the time you came along, they were not farming. Your father didn't farm?
No. So after the war, they came back to Dominguez to find that they had two homes that my grandfather, Inatomi, built. They had a tractor, a couple of trucks. That it was all gone, unfortunately. So they ended up in West Los Angeles, called Saltel.
Oh, yeah.
And my father was an auto mechanic for a while, and then he became a gardener.
Oh,
yeah.
So somewhat that's agriculture, isn't it?
That is. That is.
And you grew up in Gardena.
Yes.
I'm thinking about. Well, let's. Some of our listeners may not. I'm sure most of, and probably all of our listeners are aware of what happened to Japanese Americans after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But let's give them a little background, especially with the focus on the farmers, the Japanese American farmers, and their plight. Maybe start with the history of how they came to the U.S. and started farming, and then we can get into what happened at World War II.
Yeah, boy, the first pioneers, my goodness, they start coming around the late 1890s.
Okay.
And predominantly they went to work on the farms because that's what they came from, their background from Japan.
Right.
And they just worked fingers to the bone, blood, sweat, and tears, and just hit the ground running.
Right.
And they really made a name for themselves, and they just started to establish themselves. And they did this all for the sake of their children and their future generations. And World War II came, and whatever they worked for was all taken away, unfortunately. So when they were incarcerated, they were only allowed to carry what what they could carry.
Right.
So everything was pretty much lost.
Yeah. But many of them, so the first generation came, and initially they worked on farms just as laborers. It wasn't their
Correct.
farms, correct?
Right.
But eventually, through that hard work, they were able to start their own farms and build that up. Was that more the second generation, or did the first generation also begin to acquire their own farms and start to grow things?
The first generation, there was laws passed that they couldn't own land.
Oh.
So they got around that by purchasing the land through their sons, the second generation. So there were the Iseis that were able to buy land to farm through the purchase through their sons, the Niseis.
Oh, okay, because they were born here.
Correct.
And since they were born here, they were citizens.
Yes.
So
yes.
that allowed them to then. So it was really the Niseis that, well, the first generation and the second generation. The second generation was allowed to buy the farms, but there was still a lot of first generation around to work and to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And as I understand it, especially in some areas, the Japanese Americans really became very prominent as far as the amount of fruits and vegetables that were being grown. What can you tell us about that?
Boy, hard workers.
Yeah.
And just determined, and they persevered, and they just made a big mark in the agriculture industry.
Right.
I have so much love and respect for all of them that came.
Right.
Because as a third generation, I am, as a result, what's the word?
To use an agricultural analogy,
right.
You've reaped
Correct.
a lot of the fruits of their labor, right?
Exactly.
Well done, Edwin.
Well done. Yes, correct.
Right. Do you know what crops your grandfather grew in Dominguez Hills?
Sure. It was cabbage. Celery.
Okay.
And then later on, they grew flowers as well.
Okay. Interesting.
So he had one truck for flowers, one truck for the vegetables, and he would drive that to Los Angeles to the flower market and the produce market.
Right. Is that the same market that's just almost downtown LA, just a little bit south?
The same one,
big produce market there.
Yeah,
or was it the one? Is it the one? The original farmers market is now more of a tourist place in LA. The original LA farmers market is now like a tourist spot. Right. Was he going there, do you think, or was he going to the one on? I think it's on Olympic Boulevard. It's the
Olympic Boulevard, the old one.
Okay, is that older than the one on? Where is that? La Cienega, I think, Fairfax area.
I believe it's older. Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. For some reason, I thought that one at Fairfax area was the first one, but I knew the one on Olympic was much bigger and is predominant.
Right. Approximately what years was he growing?
See, my grandfather Inatomi, boy, he arrived first to Mexico. He did mining, and then he came up to California, I believe, 1901, to work at various farms. Okay. So as to when he started, I'm thinking 1910s, somewhere close to when his first daughter was born. So my guess is about 1910, 1912.
That was before Hollywood came to California.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I say Hollywood, I don't mean the city, I mean
the movie industry.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Well, one of the reasons I asked about what crops he grew, because I was wondering if he grew strawberries, because I read something doing a little research for today, that at one point, 80% of the strawberries grown in Southern California were grown by Japanese Americans.
It's true. Yes.
And now it's probably much higher percentage of Hispanic
Americans are now doing the growing. There's still some Japanese growers,
Oh,
but it seems to be a place where immigrants can get their start. And it's a tough fruit to grow too. It's not easy.
Right.
yeah. Teresa
Yeah.
used to be, well, she used to do marketing. Well, she used to be, uh, I can't remember your exact title, but she worked for the California Strawberry Board.
Mhm.
That was the title, right? Did I get that right?
They were. It was an advisory board, and when I
Advisory
was
board.
there, now it's a commission.
Okay.
Yes, and I knew a lot of Japanese growers then. That was in the mid '80s, and I learned a lot from them about not just berries but food because they all had their favorite restaurants. And I had come from Western North Carolina, well, where, as Rick will attest, people thought it was exotic to get pizza. And they showed me some wonderful, wonderful Japanese food, Japanese restaurant. You would go in with them, they would sit down, and they didn't even order. The people at the restaurant just started bringing food. And I had some of the best food that way. It was wonderful.
That was up mostly in Central California, like near the Bay
No,
Area. Where was this?
it was up and down the coast,
Okay, so
everywhere
all
we
over.
went.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
I
interesting.
had never had sushi before. They they
Oh, wow.
introduced me to sushi.
I love
Yeah.
sushi. I'd eat it every meal if I could, if I could afford it.
Yeah. They also told me some of the guys who were still growing at that time said that they were fortunate enough to have good friends who took care of their land for them during the internment, and they were able to come back to their land. But I know of some people who thought they had good friends and didn't get their land back. So,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I try to capture as many of those stories on my Facebook page. There is many people who watched over their housing and their land. And so for those few fortunate, they were able to come back and start
mhm.
a lot easier. Everybody else, it was start from scratch. So
Yes.
That's how I met Ron, is when my mom's obituary was in the produce publications, he reached out to me.
Yes,
Yeah.
Cynthia, just to remind our listeners, since Cynthia's mother was Japanese American, and she was very prominent in the
She was Nisei. Mm-hmm.
right? She was very prominent in the produce industry as a citrus salesperson for Ocean Spray Citrus, and she passed a couple of years ago, and the obituary came out, and she got a lot of well-deserved praise for her efforts in the produce industry and, her ordeal as being interned. So that's how we've met Ron, and Ron has become one of our biggest supporters at the Produce Buzz and one of our biggest fans. We really appreciate him interacting with us there. Another thing that I read is another thing I found too is beyond the strawberries, 80% of the strawberries being grown by Japanese Americans in Southern California. I read that at one time before the war, 35% of the value of all commercial truck crops grown in California were grown by Japanese Americans. Japanese Americans were responsible for 35% of all truck crops. And by truck, our listeners may not understand what we mean by truck crops. That's usually vegetables. Like what Ron said, his grandfather grew celery, cabbage, cucumbers, I suppose, all types of vegetables. So that was a stunning fact to find.
So my buddy Don, who I introduced Ron to also, who I met in college, and I don't want to say his name just in case like he doesn't want me to quote him on this, but he is feels certain, I didn't ask for a bibliography, that was part of the reason for the internment because it was an easy way to commandeer the land from the Japanese. And my grandparents had 80 acres in Washington state.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the war comes, and many of those, well, I don't know, were all Japanese Americans interned, regardless if they were born here or not born here?
Even if they had 1/16 of Japanese in the bloodline, they were incarcerated. So it's around 120,000.
120,000. Okay.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much every. But one interesting fact that you sent to me, and I also read in a couple of, is that some of the Japanese Americans actually served in World War II in the military. How was that possible for them to serve in the military and not be incarcerated?
Yeah, they, my goodness. So and they say gentlemen and women too from the West Coast, they joined the military while their family were still in the camps, incarcerated. And the 442 regimental combat team became one of the most highly decorated units for its size in United States military history.
Were they all Japanese in that regiment?
All Japanese, yeah.
And didn't they get like the next to impossible like suicide missions?
They did. They wanted to prove to the United States that they were loyal, that they were loyal citizens. When you had Steve Treaty on from Driscoll Berries, I had mentioned in the comment section in your Facebook page that I always had a special heart for Driscoll because the Driscoll family, after the war, hired a lot of Japanese Americans, just like Gelson's. Oh. And one of their employees was Lawson Sakai, and he was highly decorated, 3 Purple Hearts. He served in France and Italy, but he was part of the famous Lost Battalion that saved the Texas Rangers. Not sure if you're familiar with that story.
I vaguely remember hearing about it, but I don't know the story. Can you?
Yeah, so the Texas Rangers were surrounded by the German army. And like Cynthia said, it was like pretty much a suicide mission. And so there was quite a bit of casualties by the Nisei soldiers, but they were able to liberate, I believe the number was 201 soldiers. I guess the munitions were almost gone, food and water. So, but.
And was that regiment that you mentioned, or was it another?
442. Yeah, 442nd. Yeah.
And I suppose we could look that up. Where do you know where that battle occurred?
That was in France.
In France. Okay.
France. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating story.
Yeah. So interesting how I always had a big heart for Driscoll, and right. Of course Gelson's. So these say guys, especially soldiers, come back home after the war, and they had such difficulties getting jobs just to try to reestablish themselves.
Right. I think I read that the brand Nature Ripe was started by Japanese Americans. Is that true, or did I get misinformed on that?
Boy, that one I don't know of. I know of the brand.
Right.
Seems like I saw that too, Edwin.
Yeah.
That the Japanese Americans, the first generation who came here, were used to cooperating with each other, and that joining a cooperative like that was a natural thing for them.
Right.
So.
Okay, so I found my research on this. In 1917, the Japanese American strawberry growers formed the Central California Berry Grower Association, which became Nature Ripe Berry Growers in 1922. And they included a bylaw stipulating that half its board directors had to be Japanese. I don't know if that's still true or not.
I'll be darned.
But that's, and I read this morning in one of the produce trade journals that Nature Ripe is going to be featured heavily in a new Netflix animated cartoon.
Wow.
Based on the character Strawberry Shortcake. My daughters used to watch Strawberry Shortcake. Did you watch Strawberry Shortcake, Cynthia?
No. Edwin, you're older than me, but you're not old enough to be my father.
I know. I always think
I was watching, Bugs Bunny or Pepe Le Pew or something more, violent.
Hey, Ron, I have a question.
Sure.
Did you know the Tanamura family from Tanamura and Antle?
I did not. I did a post on them because they're another great family, great story. And the relationship between the Antle and Tanamura family was really a great story.
Yes.
So,
can you tell us? Oh, go ahead, Rick.
They established Tanamura and Antle in 1980, the same year that you started work at Gelson's.
oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was with the California Iceberg Lettuce Commission for 7 years. And so I got to know George a little bit when we'd have our meetings for the lettuce. That's George Antle. I'm George Tanamura.
Oh, wow.
Right.
He lived to be 101. He just died a few years ago.
Yeah. Yes.
And his land, his family's land was taken away. They came back after and they started over and they rebuilt and
They
bought.
rebuilt.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. One of the biggest lettuce growers in California.
Yeah.
They were the biggest at one point, I think.
Well, I think George's family, they did the growing, and the Antle family did the marketing, the packing, the shipping, and the marketing. But the Tanamura family did the growing. And one time, I think they were the biggest. The Tanamura family was the biggest lettuce grower in California.
Right.
For our listeners, you may or may not have recognized that brand name, Tanamura and Antle. If you go into a grocery store today, you'll find their lettuces on the shelf. So look for them. Mm-hmm. It's good. I buy the romaine. The romaine is always excellent. But now George was.
But it's T&A is like the label that.
Yeah, sometimes they don't spell it out. Sometimes
Yes.
they do. I've seen it spelled out. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That's right. T&A. That could mean something different.
And there used to be a lot of talk about that at one time.
Before everything got so politically correct.
Yep.
You mean tomatoes and apples?
Exactly.
Yes.
I read also that George's father and uncle both served in World War II. And I suppose they were part of that same regiment, or were there other regiments other than the 442?
There was the 100th Battalion, 522, and there was military intelligence and one or two more units. But there was also the Women's Army Corps. So that's definitely worth mentioning. So they wanted to prove their loyalty.
Yes, of course. Did any of them fight in the Pacific, or were they not taken there because they were Japanese?
Because they're Japanese. Only one that I knew of who was actually in the Air Force.
So the Japanese Americans served almost exclusively in Europe.
Predominantly France and Italy, yes.
Yeah.
Did you ever know any Japanese Americans that were forced to fight in the Japanese army?
No.
Have you heard of them?
I heard a lot of times there was stories where the Issei parents would send their children back to Japan to learn the culture, and
They
they were
sent
supposed
it.
to come back.
Let's be specific. They sent the boys back.
The boys. It's correct. Yeah.
No gender equality there.
And then some of them, when the war broke out, they were stuck over there.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that was some interesting times for them. It was terrible.
Yeah, my wife's uncle was in the Battle of Attu in Alaska. Did you remember hearing about that?
No.
Yeah, that's the only territory in the United States that the Japanese actually captured. The farthest west island in the Aleutian Islands, they captured that island during World War II. And so ships were sent there to liberate the island. And my wife's uncle was in that battle. And he ended up with severe post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Correct.
Or anyway, they gave him they gave my wife's uncle a lobotomy. It was an experimental thing.
Oh my
And so for the
God.
rest of his life after that, he had this hole in his head, where they drilled into his brain, and he had the intelligence of maybe a third grader
Oh,
for his entire rest of his life. But I was interested in that battle, so I found a documentary on it, and I was watching it, and there was a Japanese American doctor from California who went back to Japan to assist in something. And when the war broke out, they put him into the Japanese army as a surgeon.
Oh, wow.
And he was at that battle of Attu, and he died there. And he kept a diary about his life. And
my goodness.
very interesting, because he was fighting against his own countrymen, because he was Japanese American, but he wasn't really fighting. He was a surgeon taking care of the wounded. It's a very, very interesting story. It's hard to believe that that happened as well.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but it definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But that diary, a soldier when they captured the Japanese and the battle was over, he got the diary and he kept it for years and years. And so finally he decided he wanted to go back and find his descendants. And so he found his daughter in California and brought her the diary and gave it to her.
My goodness.
Situation.
nice that.
Yeah.
So tell us more about your Facebook page, Japanese Americans in the Produce and Floral Industry. How did you get started with that?
I started doing this in 2014, and it originally was, I wanted to, me and my friend David, we wanted to do something to honor all the Japanese Americans that work for Gelson's. And it kind of didn't work out, but I had this Facebook page, and I thought, wow, it started me on an accidental journey to learn about my own history. So I started digging and researching stories, and it's been just a neat journey to learn about my own history. So since my parents never talked about it, they wanted to shelter me of that part of their history, I suppose. So yeah. My parents, just bits and pieces. And the one that stands out about my family's history is I had 3 uncles who served in the Army in World War II, and another 2 uncles that served in the Korean War. But my one uncle who served in World War II, the military intelligence, this was at a holiday party, family party, and he was drunk, and he was, the first time he was drunk, and he was really upset, and he was recounting the story of when he was trying to rent a room, and he was in his full uniform, and he said he could still remember the the door slamming in front of his face. And I was just very young, but that's one of the bits and pieces I've heard of their experiences. But other than that, yeah, never talked about it. So, and yet the Issei's and Nisei's came back. They
Mhm.
persevered, and like I said, they hit the ground running and started from scratch. And they just they gave that push to us, the third, the fourth, fifth, sixth generation.
Right.
Cynthia, did your mom, like my parents, rarely, or did they talk about their experiences
Oh my
during?
gosh, I did not know my mother was interned till I was 16 years old. No, 15.
Yeah, right.
She was watching this like made for TV movie. My mother was a reader. She didn't watch TV. And so she's watching the show. And so I'm like, kind of watching behind her thing. And I see this woman come out of what looks like a refrigerator cardboard box. And I'm like, and it was the bathroom. I'm like, what are you watching? And she goes, that happened to me. And I was like, well, what happened to you? I had no idea. I'm 15 years old and nothing was covered in any kind of history books. I remember that we'd gone to the Smithsonian, and in the 80s, it was the internment exhibit. They showed like the living quarters and what have you. But I can remember my mother saying like she's never been so cold because the slats of the cabin, if you will, the
Bricks.
shelter were not flush. So the Idaho winters would just go through it. And they had a blanket, they had straw pillows or pads to sleep on. Her being cold was just like something that always was a trigger for her. And then when we were at the exhibit, I remember looking at just trying to imagine, and it was probably the size of 2.5, maybe 3 like horse stalls, maybe 3. And my mom's like, yeah, right. I wish our house was this big. She could, try to cut it in half. And then when I went to the LA Japanese internment camp museum, they have one that was reconstructed and it's tiny. And, they had parents and, 8 children, 7 children.
Right.
That's a very good museum in downtown Los Angeles.
Yes. Mhm.
Little Tokyo is the area, appropriately. And it talks about the internment camps, but it also gives a lot of the history before the war and the contributions that Japanese Americans made. So it's a museum worth visiting.
It's a boutique size and it's just very well done. I really.
Yeah. Let's talk about your work in the produce industry and your love for fruits and vegetables. You got any tips for our listeners about how to shop for fruits and vegetables?
Oh boy. Ever since I started listening to your podcast, and I thought, boy, I've been so many years in the business, and it's like I learned something every time I listen to your podcast.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Right. So it's so interesting. And the 4 of you have so much chemistry. and it's
Delicately put.
Yeah.
So what's new at Gelson's? Tell us about Gelson's and their wonderful store of Gelson's.
Boy, just expanding.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah. So Bernie Gelson's and Eugene started the first store in 1951. 1966, they sold to Bernie Briskin, but the Briskin brothers are still heavily involved and all that. And I forgot the year now. I think it's 9 years ago. Bernie Briskin sold. He was already in his 90s. And we were bought by investment group, TPG. And then recently we were bought by Pan Pacific National Holding. And it's owned by a Japanese gentleman from Japan.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So.
And that's a privately owned then.
Oh, right. So,
wow.
interesting. So nothing's really changed. Our concept remains the same.
Right.
How many
I did the
stores?
buying.
How many
Uh,
stores?
28 now,
28.
right? And next year will be 29 and possibly 30. They have another place they're looking at.
Do you have your own warehouse for distribution?
A new one, actually, Buena Park, just outside of Buena Park, brand new one. So, yeah, big one, big one.
Right.
So there's efficiency there. Have you had a lot of challenges with price competition from the bigger chains that can buy in bigger volume, or are you able to hold your own?
It's always been that way. So I did the buying for Galveston, just a backup buyer. I still ran Newport Beach, Galveston's produce department, and then one day a week, sometimes 3 weeks in one row, I do the backup buying for the produce buying for Galveston's. And one of my first lessons was potatoes, red and white potatoes. And I know it was a Tuesday, and I got called to the office. It was a Sansei guy. He was the head buyer. And I thought, I'm getting called into the office. Well, what happened? So he says, hey, Ron, you had 4 cases of red potato left over. You try to order closer. And I thought, oh, wow. It's like, I had to ask. I said, does Gelson's ever buy a half a truck or maybe a truck with potatoes last months? And that wasn't the right question. And his eyes lit up and said, oh no, we buy 6 days a week, continuous, changes over. So, and it's been like that for most of the product we buy, except for apples and citrus, where at least have a pallet in the warehouse. But so far as it comes at a higher cost because we don't buy in bulk. But so far as the freshness for the consumer, that's why we keep on having people come back. So we always have customers say, I don't understand why your iceberg lettuce lasts so long, and I go to this place and it lasts 2-3 days, and it's like cheaper, much cheaper. And so they learn over the years, and that's why Galveston's is still going strong. I mean, if you look at our prices, it's kind of like, wow. But then to know the backstory, then there's people, they begin to understand. So,
sure. Yeah. There is a difference in the freshness. I've noticed that, at least when I was there in Pasadena. So that's good to hear the story. I didn't really understand that, but that's, you're buying every day instead of buying and stocking it up. And so that makes a difference. And it's worth the extra price not to lose it.
Right.
Do you remember the chain of grocery stores? There was a very big chain called El Rancho in Pasadena.
I have. Boy, that's, how long ago was this? This is by
1970s. I'm not sure if they were there. Right. I went to college in Pasadena. I was there from 73 through 76. And I remember there was a Japanese produce manager there. And when I walked into that produce department for the first time as a freshman in college, being from North Carolina, I'll never forget how wonderful the produce department was. I'd never seen anything like it. Everything was trimmed perfectly. Right. All types of melons that I've never even seen before. So many different items. And I remember he took a lot of pride in those displays.
Yeah. It's just an art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just an art.
Yeah.
Right.
What's your favorite fruit or vegetable?
Boy. fruit would have to be strawberries.
Mhm.
The one fruit that I heard on your podcast that I've been dying to try is you mentioned pink kiwis in
Mhm.
one of your episodes.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So that one I like probably kiwis and strawberries at the same
Yeah.
uh,
Very similar.
Mhm.
vegetables as avocado, hands down.
Do you like Japanese eggplant?
I do. I used to put it in a toaster oven, cook it whole until it got really soft.
Yeah.
Of course, my Achilles heel is soy sauce. It's like right. It's like, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
But yeah, I love Japanese eggplant.
Mhm.
Regular eggplant, the only time I eat it is when I go eat Italian. It's like always get eggplant parmesan.
Right.
But so do you like, which one do you prefer, Japanese or?
Well, yeah, I prefer either the baby eggplant or the Japanese eggplant because they're smaller.
More
When you
tender.
cut them up, they're smaller in size.
Right.
And
A little more tender too, I think.
Right. Tell us, what would your mother's typical vegetable meal be like? How did she cook vegetables?
Boy, New England style.
Really?
Down to mush.
Not England style. She boiled. So I grew up eating vegetables on the soft side. We didn't have microwaves, so I know
Oh,
you
no.
like using microwaves, right?
Rick, those were terrible times.
But so your mother didn't cook a lot of stir fry vegetables and things like that?
She did. She was a fantastic cook, amazing cook.
So
So
you said she owned a restaurant.
she owned a restaurant. So she had a couple beauty shops, and not at the same time, but she kind of got bored with it. And of course, my parents had divorced a long time when I was very young. And she says, I'm going to look for a business. And that's all she said. And she sold her beauty shop. And I came home one day and says, oh, I bought a restaurant, a Japanese restaurant. I said, wow.
Good, so you can give us some recipes for real teriyaki or all the
Ramen.
sauces and what have you.
All the sauces.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in the kitchen, and she always had, the chefs come in. So they did all their secret. Every chef had their own.
Yeah.
Right. And they did it their own secret, whatever. So I'm not sure if I could help you there, but
They didn't reveal those secrets. They kept them close to their chest, I guess.
So her food was Japanese American food, correct?
it was Japanese American food. But then she also cooked. She made a great spaghetti, not from scratch, but American food chuck roast. So yeah, she cooked a variety. Korean flank steak. But yeah, amazing cook. She's another story of her family coming out of internment, incarceration, and starting from scratch. And she worked hard, just like my father. He started, auto mechanic and then gardening. And then she went to beauty school, and she's opened up her own shop and then another one. And it's just amazing generation. They call them the
greatest generation.
Correct. That ever lived. Right. So
yeah.
Well, very inspiring. We've just about run out of time. It's been great having you here, Ron.
Now, do you folks, are you still going to do the name the fruit and what's the other?
The homegrown.
Homegrown.
Oh, we didn't. I should have prepared a little quiz for you today, Ron. I was so eager to just get your story. I didn't prepare any kind of quiz.
Come on,
It was
Teresa's
fun
got to
having
have one.
But she
Oh,
can
I'm
come up with
gonna.
a homegrown.
I'll try to see if I can come up with a homegrown.
But actually, I did prepare a quiz for one of our shows but never used it. You want to try it?
Oh,
I've got a
shit. Here
few
we go.
questions. Let me just see if
I
can
never get
find
any of
it.
these stupid questions.
Well, this will be much easier. This was actually pretty easy.
What the hell's that supposed to mean?
Ah. Okay, let me pull it up. I found it here. Okay, this is going to be easy. Cynthia, it's very easy. All right, ready?
Gee, thanks.
Okay, we're just ready.
I
Okay.
need some low-hanging fruit.
Okay, this is low hanging. Ready for the first question? Hands on your buzzers. Okay. From which part of a plant does a fruit typically develop? A, leaf, B, flower, or C, trunk?
Flower.
Hey, Cynthia, you got one.
The Japanese word is sakura.
Okay. All right. Which part of celery do we eat? Most often eat? Leaves, roots, or stem?
Stem.
Oh, wow. Cynthia, you're on fire today. Okay. Let's see here. Now, this is a little tougher. Maybe Ron will get this one, I think. Williams and Conference are varieties of which type of fruit? Bananas, pears, or apples?
Oh, pears.
Fantastic, Ron. I knew you would get that one. Congratulations. So glad you got one as our special guest. All right. This is a fourth question. This fruit is often grown in many Asian countries and is considered one of the stinkiest fruits in the world. You should be able to guess this without me giving you the multiple choice. Persimmon, rambutan, or durian?
Oh boy.
Out loud in many
Durian.
places.
The durian. Teresa got it right.
That was a wild guess.
Yeah, I've never eaten one, but I've smelled one before. And one of the there was an Asian buffet restaurant in Arcadia that had soft serve ice cream, on the buffet, and they always had as one of the flavors durian.
Wow.
Oh boy.
It was actually tasted very good, but it smelled like dirty socks. In many airports in Asia, it's illegal to bring durian fruit onto the plane because of the smell.
It's so awful.
They prohibit it. That and kimchi, I've heard, is also the other smell.
Andrew Zimmerman, the one that goes and eats exotic fruit.
Oh yeah. Right, I've seen him before.
When he tried it, he actually almost gagged.
Yeah.
And I thought, him? It's like, wow.
Yeah, because he usually can get through anything, can he? Yeah, I've seen him before. Yeah, it's most of the people I've known that have eaten it say the taste is actually really good, but you got to get through that smell, which doesn't make sense to me because most of our taste is based on smell, and I just don't know that. But that ice cream that I had was actually pretty good. But you kind of had to hold your nose as you ate it. It wasn't real strong. There wasn't an overwhelming smell from the ice cream. It was just a slight bit. So that was.
That's okay. I would have taken a pass on that one.
So anyway. So, Produce Buzzers podcast fans, it's time for your favorite segment on the Produce Buzzers podcast. Yes, it is your favorite segment. Don't deny it. You're addicted to these terrible puns that Teresa brings us. So, Teresa, let's torture our listeners with another homegrown.
Okay. So if time flies like an arrow, What flies like a banana?
Okay, let's ask the question again. Give everybody a chance to guess. If time flies like an arrow, what flies like a banana?
Right.
Okay, Ron, you going to guess it?
Oh my goodness.
Rick,
Ding.
come on. Rick, you're
Wow.
here.
Wow.
I can't think of anything.
Okay. Cynthia?
Mm,
Okay.
Stamp.
Okay.
Edwin?
I can't get it.
Okay. If time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana.
Oh, I get it. Took me a while to get that.
I love it.
You didn't groan loud enough, Ron.
Yeah.
You're trying to be nice to Teresa. You're supposed to groan really loudly.
Wow. That's awesome.
Okay, on that awesome or perhaps not so awesome note, we do have to end the show now. Ron, it's been such a pleasure having you here.
We love having you, Ron. It was
Yeah, that
great
was fun.
fun.
Yes.
Me too.
Yes,
It
thank
was
you so
awesome.
much. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us. And we'd like to have you back again.
Thank you.
Maybe you can come on and tell us about some fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
sometime.
Fruit of the week or something like that.
Yeah.
I want to take part of the quiz and
Yeah.
homegrown.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We'll have to work that
Hey,
in.
maybe we could do a live remote from your produce department and have you tell us about stuff.
Sure. Cool.
All right.
Thanks for
Well,
your
thanks,
time.
everybody.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye
Bye.
now. Thank
Bye.
you.
Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Produce Buzzers podcast, brought to you by Produce Buzz, the gathering place for lovers of fresh fruits and veggies. We hope you were entertained a bit and educated a lot about fresh produce. Be sure to join us next time, and please tell your friends to do so as well. Like, share, and comment on our Produce Buzz Facebook page, and check out our website at www.producebuzz.com. There you will find articles about fresh fruits and veggies, how to select, store, and prepare them, as well as lots of interesting facts about all the wonderful bounty the earth provides for us. Until next time, be fruitful and don't forget to veg out.